Hello, I'm Jennifer Stadum. Thank you so much for choosing my presentation, Teaching Science Through the Lens of the 4 R's, Relationships, Respect, Reciprocity, Responsibility. We'll talk about how relevance fits in just a few minutes. So the agenda today, we're going to cover what are the 4 R's, how do the 4 R's relate to science. We'll talk a little bit about student engagement through gift-based education in all curriculum areas as it pertains to the 4 R's and science and the gift of the 4 R's. And just talking about we are all striving for relationships, including our students, and a sense of connection. And I would like to invite us to do this through science. So in our introductions, I welcome K-12 teachers and administrators. Welcome. You do not have to be a teacher of science to watch this recording. Hopefully everyone who engages with this information can get something out of it. I'll be doing a land acknowledgement. I'll be talking about who I am and my relationships as a part of the introduction. So with the land acknowledgement, I feel it's very important to understand who was here before us. It allows us a deeper connection to both the peoples who occupied this space and used it for survival and for sustenance and for growth and for thriving on for millennia. Recently, and again, this is something I'll bring up a little bit later, but I read a book from a tribal chairman in California near where I am from, and I learned all sorts of things about the land where I came from that I had never actually questioned before. Here I am in Montana. I've been doing this work for the past 14, 15 years, and I had never actually applied the context for which I learned all things about Montana tribes and the land in Montana and what has happened here for millennia. And I never applied that to California. So I'm excited to bring this to our realm of thinking today. So in my land acknowledgement today, I am here in Helena, Montana. And in the spirit of healing, I acknowledge and honor the original peoples of the southwestern Montana, Helena, Montana area, the Salish, the Blackfeet, the Kootenai, and other tribal nations, Crow, Northern Cheyenne, Chippewa Cree, Nez Perce, Nakota, Dakota, Little Shell, Assiniboine, Shoshone, and the many Indigenous people who call it home, past, present, and future. So again, my name is Jennifer Stadum. I am from Scottish, English, French, Sephardim heritage. My pronouns are she, her. I do have another name, my Amskapi Bagani, my Blackfeet given name from ceremony that I have attended. I am not Blackfeet, but I have attended ceremony, and I did have the gift of this name Asowawani, and Asowawani means flies above. I also have another name, Tavona Israel Bat Devora. That is my Hebrew name. And I come from the traditional lands of the Muwekma Ohlone, the Cocheno, Karkin, Coast Miwok, and Alaguilai in California. I recently learned, as I stated before, in the book by Greg Saris called Becoming Story, I recently learned there that this place I was born in was originally known in Ohlone as Huchuin. So I think sense of place fits into our whole discussion today because the relationship to the land can lead us to all curriculum areas. And sense of place rests its case on the unexamined premise that being from somewhere is better than being from nowhere. All of us, it asserts, are generally better off with a place to call our own. Places, it reminds us, are really very good. And this is from a wonderful book called Wisdom Sits in Places by Keith Basso. So I would like to begin with the first R, relationships. And so I love to consider these people, you know, my relationships of the soul. You may recognize some of them. So in this first grouping, these are, of course, all people from your neck of the woods and the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribal lands. Michelle Mitchell has been a sister friend and former OPI colleague, a mentor and collaborator. And I am so honored that she invited me to present for you in this video today. My dear friend Tim Ryan, that is a picture of us presenting at the National Indian Education Association conference in Portland, Oregon. I think that was back in 2015. And the ZL under Tony Kashola's name, ZL is Hebrew for Zikrono Livracha, which means may his memory always be for blessing. And so I honor and hold space for Tony and his tutelage and his mentoring and his kindness to me over the years. Another relation is my dear friend Julie Kajun. I've learned so much from her, and I just appreciate her taking me out on Salish lands and teaching me about her family and providing me with some of her family's stories. That's really been illuminating and such a gift. Michael Munson used to work for OPI as well, and she has been a tremendous influence on my the philosophy behind Indian Education for All. Jermaine White is also an incredible mentor. We've collaborated over the years, and her work with the Natural Resources Department for the tribes well, you will see here some of her work today as we get into some of the examples later on. Mr. Vernon Finley, he also has been a tremendous mentor and friend, and I've just learned so much from him. And my buddy Frank Finley, he was on our Indigenous science team, and that was the team that was brought together to teach me how to teach better about Indigenous sciences and Western sciences together. And so I really appreciate the gift of all of these people. And without what they've taught me, I wouldn't be before you today on your screen. My other relationships, Donnie Wetzel, who works at OPI, he is like a brother. Mike Jetty, of course. Shane Doyle's also like a brother. My former supervisor, Mandy Smoker Broadus, has taught me so much and believed in me. Amy Williams, who's now at Folsom High School, she's been a tremendous mentor and friend. She was also on the Indigenous science team, as was Shane Doyle. Robin Walkimmer, I have just the blessing of having worked with her and known her. And so I think of her every time I talk about place and I talk about connectedness, especially ethnobotany. Carolyn Pardini, who is a retired teacher and still doing lots of incredible educational things around the Flathead. And of course, Denise Juneau. She was one of the very first people that just walked into my office as when I became an Indian Education for All specialist and believed in me. So all of these people, because of my relationships, I have grown and I've become comfortable with this information to share it with you and hopefully inspire you to bring this into your classroom. So what are the 4 R's? Relationships. I think respect and relevance aren't really, you can't take them apart when you're talking especially about science and the instruction of science. So I put respect and relevance together, reciprocity and responsibility. Now let's talk a little bit more about these. Relationships, establish positive relationships. Establish them first with yourself and then with other teachers, with the land that you're on, with tribal members, with the living things found on the landscape, and of course with your students. Respect and relevance. Establish a sense of respect and relevance, again, with yourself, with other teachers, with the land, with tribal members, with the living things found on the landscape, with science and tech being traditional ecological knowledge, cohesively, and with your students. Because if your students see themselves as respected and as relevant to you, if they see what you're teaching about the land, about science concepts, about Indigenous knowledges that have been passed down or passed on to others, when students see those things as relevant to them, they'll want to engage more deeply. And I hope that you will too, when you see that your membership is a part of this community, whether you're from Salish Kootenai or you're from a different place, you are now in relationship with the land because you're there. So I hope that you find relevance in that as well. Reciprocity is very, very important. And I'm sure if you are a native teacher watching this, you're familiar with all of these tenets. But if you're a non-native teacher, I just thought I would throw in a few things here to make you feel more comfortable, especially if you're new to the reservation and to teaching on the reservation. So with reciprocity, I invite you to reciprocate when anything of value is shared with you. Wisdom, medicine, knowledge, a story, time, or space. If you're asking an elder or cultural expert anything, reciprocate with a gift, sweetgrass, a stipend if you have that available, or tobacco. If harvesting from the land for food, medicine, or teaching aids, reciprocate to whatever you are harvesting with a prayer or a statement of gratitude, if that's more comfortable and accessible to you, or tobacco or sweetgrass, or you can ask what the traditions are for the people that maybe that you are working with, and embrace those traditions for providing gratitude to what it is that you're taking from the land. Be a role model of genuine reciprocity and gratitude for your students. And I invite you to require your students to practice mindful reciprocity. I just really believe that reciprocity breeds respect, and of course that develops relationships. And finally, responsibility. Responsibility towards yourself. Are your actions in alignment with your best self? Responsibility towards others. Are others provided a safe place to express themselves and learn? Responsibility as a community member. Are you as involved as you can be to co-create a community that serves all of its members? And responsibility towards the land and the foods and medicines that come from the land. Are you respectful when you're on the land and with its resources? So let's explore this further. How do the 4 R's relate to science? Well, information, whether from a Western science concept or from an Indigenous knowledge transfer or traditional ecological knowledge gathered from a landscape for millennia, it's all about relationships, right? If you think about science, especially physical science, reactions only happen after actions between 2 or more things that are related to each other, have some sort of, whether you're using chemicals and they either become a new chemical or they repel each other, they're having a reaction to those things, whether it's substances, elements, energy. You can't have kinesthetic energy without potential energy, right? Systems are also all about relationships and how the parts within a system are related, such as an ecosystem. So when you start thinking about a bison, which is iconic for, looking at a resource that was available to many tribes here in Montana. And so the bison eat the grass, and the grass comes from the soil, and the soil contains microbes that are in the grass that are eaten by the bison. And then when you eat the bison, you're eating those same microbes and all of those nutrients in the grass. Well, a step further is for people who have lived on a landscape for millennia, they are going to have burial rituals for their people. And so their people are going to become, their bones are going to become part of the soil. And then the grass grows, and then the bison eats the grass, and then the nutrients go into the bison, and then you eat the bison. And so you are even more connected to all of the people who have ever been on a landscape when you think of it that way. So it's a really deep sense of relationship and connection. And of course, reproduction doesn't happen in isolation with most biological organisms. And so you need more than one thing to interact and to have a relationship. So there's a series of relationships that happens with reproduction. Even in a flower, you have to have, the physical flower has to grow from the seed, and then it has to take a chemical process through photosynthesis. And, before it can become, there's pollen, and then you need bees and pollinators. And so really, when you look outside, we've covered all of the DCIs, right? The disciplinary core ideas in our science content standards. We've covered physical science, we've covered life sciences, and we've covered earth and space science, all from relationships. So I hope you can become excited about looking for ways to see the 4 R's in science. Another way to look at it is information, whether from a Western science concept or from an Indigenous knowledge transfer, should be respected, and its relevance should be inherent rather than superimposed on it, right? So if you're encouraging your students to do research, hopefully you're also encouraging them to cite very carefully where they got that information and to think critically about where they got that information. Are they looking for a comparison of respiration rates among mammals? Do humans have the same respiration rate, say, as a cat? So if your students are looking at that, are they finding the information from Wikipedia? Is that information valid? Is it relevant? Is it, you know, a respectful source of information? Or is it just information that's out there that can't be validated? So I think that's another way of thinking about relevance, is a way of thinking about information that needs to be validated. So cultural context is highly relevant within the context of Indigenous science and knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge. And what that means is that if you learn anything, say, from an elder or a nugget of tribal knowledge, I always try to attribute where I learned something from. So if I learned something from Tim Ryan, I like to, you know, let people know that Tim is the person that taught me this in this context. We were out on the river, or we were standing on the bank of the Flathead River, or whatnot. Cultural knowledge, different from Western science, you know, it deserves such a deep respect because it's taken a long time to gather all of this knowledge. And when you think of how successful the Salish and Kootenai and Ponderay peoples are on the reservation now, as far as the bitterroot harvest and bison range restoration, or the bison restoration on the bison range, etc., that all of that knowledge, the people's way and how to manage the wildlife crossings, all of that isn't just Western science knowledge. All of that is also includes much knowledge that has been gathered over many, many years. So that deserves a deep respect, as does a well-researched scientific principle that also deserves deep respect. Scientific context is imperative to the validity and the relevance of data. So as I mentioned before, I kind of see relevance also related as in a Western science concept to the validity of data. And of course, the respectful collection of scientific data is imperative. Was the study sound? Was the sample large enough? You know, all the good, really good scientific questions that we're teaching our students, hopefully, as they do lab experiments and inquiries. They're also learning that it's very important to document what you did, and or to take pictures of what you did, or to, you know, follow a very specific regimen so you can control your variables, right? And finally, information, whether from, again, a Western science concept or from an Indigenous knowledge transfer, requires reciprocity and responsibility. So when you're citing scientific data, it is responsible to cite it accurately and appropriately. And the same goes true for when sharing Indigenous knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge. It is responsible to attribute credit to the people who are the keepers of the knowledge. So to compare a little bit Western science and traditional knowledges, Western science tends to be written. You tend to go to a book or now to the computer. It is reductionist. So let's really get down to what is the actual variable that changed, or what is the actual condition that changed, right? It really gets down to a fine-grained thing rather than scanning back out and looking at all of the things that may have affected, you know, some sort of scientific concept. Science is generally, as you know, especially if you are sitting here as a science teacher, it's taught and learned mostly analytically. Here's what we're going to do today. What questions might you have involving these very specific things? How would you set up an inquiry, etc.? Western science also is hierarchical and compartmentalized. And so this tends to be very different from traditional ecological knowledge, in the sense that when you look at Linnaeus and you look at you know, how we do the kingdom, phylum, species, family, genera, you know, et cetera, all of that, it's very specific, and it's very logical, and it's very ordered, and it has a point of origin where the species diverged due to, you know, genetic variations and genetic mutations based on environment, etc. Western science is also based upon laws and theories, not necessarily on experiences. It is mainly quantitative, and I can tell you that from the article that I wrote on my master's thesis science research on long-billed curlews and sandhill cranes in a grazed wet meadow habitat at Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. Yes, the longest thesis title ever. But really, when we broke down all of the knowledge, we were looking at presence, absence, how many were there, how many weren't there, and what was the percentage of time. So it ended up being a lot of numbers. And it took kind of, to me, away from the story of this very grand landscape that started out as, a glacier. And then the whole landscape underneath was affected by the glacier. And there are still kettle ponds and other glacial relics of that landscape. So to then look at the species that are there right then, to me, was very, very reductionist and very quantitative. So maybe I'm not a very good Western science 100%. Maybe I'm a better science teacher than a scientist, because I really like what's on the other side of the page too. Western science, the data is collected by specialists or experts. And so often, we talk to our students about, you are the scientist today, you are, creating this this investigation, you're following through with this investigation, etc. So also there's obviously the hypothesis testing and model building. Whereas on the other side of the page, traditional knowledges, well, if you're looking back millennia, it had to be oral tradition. Yes, there were, with some tribes, with some plains tribes, there were winter counts, and yes, there are pictographs, etc. But for the most part, especially if you're looking at the practices of subsistence, and so, how are you going to build your shelter? Where are you going to build your shelter? Where are you going to, have a group of people where there's fresh water and plenty of safe places to store food away from, say, grizzly bears, etc. All of that knowledge is going to be transferred through oral tradition, and through experiences and through learned experiences. So yes, we go here during the summertime because this is where all the huckleberries are. And so we gather the huckleberries, and when we're done with that, we move to our next camp where we will also, be practicing subsistence. Traditional knowledges tend to be a holistic approach. So as I was mentioning, thinking about the wholeness of the Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge areas being originally under a glacier, and all of the impacts that this glacier that had been there thousands and thousands of years ago is still on the land. There's still evidence. There's still plants that grow specifically only in glacial till in Red Rock Lake. So really, traditional knowledges tend to step back and look at the whole picture. Mentioned also that traditional knowledge is learned from observation experience, tend to do with the environment, but it's also not just the environment as we see out our window or as we walk on the land. It's part of social and also spiritual relationships. And spirituality doesn't have to take away from science or knowledge. Spirituality can actually add a great deal of context to science and to knowledge. Traditional knowledges can be based on cumulative and collective experiences. So it's information that's gathered over a very, very, very long period of time, and often over a very grand landscape. There's so much knowledge about everything from where the camp is, all the way to, where another camp is, for the camp at the river, and then another camp on the other side of the mountains where the buffalo jump is. So that's a lot of environment, a lot of landscape to gather information from. It is mainly qualitative. And so as you listen to, there's the elder climate change videos that are available through the Natural Resources Department page on the CSKT website. These are wonderful videos. They're also included in another lesson that I'll share about later. And, these elders are telling stories about the way the landscape looked when they were young, and how the landscape has changed and where huckleberries are found now, where they weren't found before, et cetera. So that qualitative piece is incredibly important when it comes to traditional knowledges. And of course, the data is not generated from structured, linear, and logical, inquiries and experiments, but it's gathered by the resource users. If I am needing to thrive on a landscape without a big grocery store, I'm going to need to want to know everything about every plant and how it can heal, how it can be nutrients, and where to find it, what the best time of year to harvest it is. All of those questions are gathered and are answered by people who have used these resources for millennia. So hint, hint, as you develop relationships in the reservation, and through the schools and through the families, find out, who has some of this knowledge, who might be willing to share it, and then offer them something in exchange for some of their knowledge, and see if they might share it with you or your students. And especially bonus if you can get this person to take you out on the landscape, because there is nothing like experiencing the landscape and then experiencing a person's knowledge, an Indigenous person to that place who has generational stories. To be on a landscape like that, to me, is the best learning experience. And I can only say that from my experience of all the time that I've spent on the reservations across Montana. And finally, and I keep talking about subsistence, that traditional knowledges are integrated and applied to traditional subsistence practices, as opposed to, let's find out how many times a cat breathes compared to how many times a human breathes. That's not necessarily going to be something that's going to change how I live my life, right? But if I'm needing to subsist on a landscape and to feel connected and to use the bounty of a landscape, I'm going to want to integrate those subsistence practices. So it's just a different lens. It's just a different way. So as you can see, hopefully there's several areas where Western science can really complement traditional knowledge, and where traditional knowledge can really complement Western science. So especially when it comes to Western science and it being, mainly quantitative, well, a whole picture of, say, looking at a climate change issue, or looking at invasive species such as the mussels and the zebra mussels and some of the other problematic fish that are in the lake that didn't used to be there, and the impact that has on the native fish of the region, especially the bull trout. Having that quantitative combined with the qualitative can be really, really impactful. And a great example of this is the People's Way, the wildlife crossings, because that is an incredible combination of tribal member knowledges as well as Western science practices. So let's talk about some connections between all of this, and hopefully create a picture for you. And I'm really crossing my fingers, and I'm really hoping that all of the links work. So my apologies if it gets a little choppy ahead of time. So as we look at this page, and I'll be going K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and then 9, 12. We'll talk about the Montana Science Content Standard. We'll talk about model curriculum, and then we'll take a look at our 4 R's checklist so you can start to see some of the integration here. So with the kindergarten through 2nd grade, and let me back up too, about the Montana Science Standards. There are several standards starting in 5th grade and going through high school that also include about American Indians, or including Indigenous populations, or there's a direct connection in the standard to American Indians and Montana Indians in particular. I do want to let you know that on the Montana Science Assessment, Indian Education for All, tribal knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, that is never assessed on the Montana Science Assessment or the alternative Montana Science Assessment. The only thing that is assessed is what is within the core concept of the science. So it does It does invite you to, especially if the standard includes American Indians or Montana Indians or Indigenous populations, it's really inviting you strongly to include that into your curriculum. And by being able to add this to the science curriculum, that is why we don't call it the next generation science standards. So yes, all of our standards in Montana are based on next generation, but we added Indian Education for All into them. And that is really an awesome thing because it helps open up the conversation that we're having today and makes my passion for traditional knowledges relevant within the science connections, and also brings my scientific background. It makes that relevant, right? So anyhow, just to let you know that yes, the Montana Science Content Standards, especially if you're new to Montana, they are based on next generation, but because we changed them, we are calling them the Montana Science Content Standards. And then please do bear in mind that any Indian Education for All, that is not assessed on the Montana Science Assessment. However, where it can show up is in the item. And so as a student gets to an item, the background reading, the background data may be tribally related data, and it may be tribally gathered data. So we are infusing Indian Education for All even into the science assessment, which is, I think, pretty exciting. So anyhow, KESS2-1, as you can see at the top, that's hyperlinked to the Next Generation Science Standard page, which goes through all of the information that you would need, including the cross-cutting concepts, the disciplinary core idea, and the science and engineering practices. And so you can, that's where the next generation in the Montana Science Content Standards is related. So a model curriculum, if you are looking at use and share observations of local weather conditions to describe changes over time, etc., seasons over time, I would recommend going to some of these lessons that we have. So this first link, the Salish Seasonal Round, which was compiled by Julie Kajun, it's actually a resource that is within this unit called Phonology, Seasons Make the World Go Round, Earth and Space Science. It is a 3-lesson unit geared towards 3rd through 5th grade, but by taking pieces of the resources such as buttercups, huckleberries, buttercups, and I'm so sorry, I'm not remembering the name of the book right now. Anyway, it is actually in all of the elementary public school libraries across Montana. It's by Jennifer Green, who goes by Jennifer Finley now. And it is absolutely buttercups, huckleberries, and so I bet I have it over here. Anyhow, I will try to find it towards the end of the, oh, here it is. Pardon me, just a moment, let me get this. This is also Huckleberries, Buttercups, and Celebrations by Jennifer Green, and Antoine Sandoval did the amazing work. So this is a book that's very relevant to this standard that you could be reading to your students. So it's, and the introduction is also by the famous Julie Kajun. So that's a wonderful part of this curriculum. So it really can be adapted, and no worries if you're revisiting a standard later on. Remember that all of these standards build on each other over time, kindergarten through 12th grade. So anyhow, so let's take a look. Let's see if it works. Okay. Now, again, thank you so much for bearing with me and the technology. It's so strange not being in front of you right now. So hopefully you can see the Salish Seasonal Round by Julie Kajun, and she talks about spring and what happens in spring. She talks about summer and what happens in summer. And all of the season, there's so much information about the plants and the people and storytelling and when it's appropriate to tell stories. So that's an incredible resource that is a part of Phonology. This is just lesson 1. So if you, I believe this PowerPoint will be shared with you, and that you'll be able to access all of the resources on it. So there's some really good teacher background knowledge here for you. The 3rd grade standard in Earth and Space Science, how it's connected to the essential understandings. Learning objectives, the background information. Here's the Salish seasonal round. I'm going to be talking about the workhouse curriculum in a little bit here for a different standard, for a different grade band. There's all kinds of resources. So again, you can even just pull the resources out and look at the standards and make that relevant to K2 as well. And it just builds their anticipation and builds their knowledge for the standards as they get more. Let's see, let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. Okay, I think we are here. And of course, I lost my place here. All right, so here we are back here. So, oops. The 4R checklist. So relationships, well, you know, this talks about the Salish seasonal round, Jennifer's book. There are other observations. There's a personal seasonal round that the students can compile themselves after looking at a Blackfeet and a Salish seasonal round. The Salish seasonal round, fun fact, developed by my friend Tim Ryan. Is it respectful and relevant? Yes. Incredibly so to where you're living in your neck of the woods. This is relevant to the tribes, and it's respectfully using tribal data and knowledge. Reciprocal. Well, how can we make it more reciprocal? Could you have someone like Whisper Means come into your classroom and talk about the way the animals use the landscape around the reservations, or maybe you have Tim Ryan come in and talk about the seasonal rounds, or somebody from the Kootenai and Salish cultural committees to come in and share stories when it's the appropriate time of year to share stories. Is it responsible? Absolutely. It uses information and practices used by the tribes on tribal land. It doesn't get much better than that. So connections 3.5. Again, here we have the science standard. That's going to relate back to the next generation science standard. This one is obtain and combine information from various sources about ways individual communities use science ideas to protect the Earth's resources, environment, and systems, and describe examples of how American Indians use scientific knowledge as practices to maintain relationships in the natural world. And as I was thinking about this standard last night, so this is obviously one that contains specific language about American Indians. And years ago, we developed this beautiful curriculum, a group of us through Glacier National Park. There were tribal members. Corky Claremont was a part of it. And there were several other really amazing people. And so let's see if I can share the correct screen again. Thank you for bearing with me. Let's get rid of what we've already looked at. And here we are at Workhouse. Now, let me show you a few things about the Workhouse curriculum. So this is a PDF, but all of the videos are available online through the Glacier National Park website. As you go into the curriculum, there is teacher background knowledge, which is really wonderful. It's very well balanced and has a lot of really great information on both the tribes on both the west side and the east side of Glacier National Park, so the Salish, Kootenai, and the Blackfeet as well. So when you look on the sidebars here, there's specific information. So right here, here's another online lesson plan that's related to using historical photographs. Then let's see down here it is, At Home in This Place. Now this was a DVD, and then of course this kind of dates when we started this curriculum project, like I said, years ago. The DVD is no longer available, but all of the videos are on the Glacier National Park website, but they're also linked here. It's like being home is from the Blackfeet perspective. We are the owners of Glacier National Park. There's even more. The Salish and Pend Oreille perspective, a sacred place, a hope for future generations. Vernon Finley is one of the folks that appears in one of these videos as well. And so that's all the background knowledge. But again, really pay attention to those sidebars because there's incredible videos and there's incredible information and other links that are just really make this the whole curriculum rich. I'm only sharing with you today Unit 1 and Lesson 1. So there are student readings. So if you want to do, go all the way through the student reading, etc. But these are really incredible lessons, so much information. So I do hope that you find them useful and hopefully, maybe even new to you. Let's go back to, oh, good, I did it right this time. So anyhow, relationships, check. Relevant and respectful, check. Reciprocal, again, invite Vernon Finley in to talk about even making the video or about, the content of the videos that he helped create for this. Is it responsible? Absolutely. So we're ticking all the boxes so far here. Moving on to 6th through 8th grade. Again, Montana Science Standard, middle school life science, develop a model to describe the cycling of matter and flow of energy among living and non-living parts of an ecosystem. And I just think you can't do any better than to teach this through Fire on the Land. If you're not familiar with Fire on the Land, it is a spectacular part of the digitized curriculum that is created by the Salish, Confederated Salish Kootenai tribes, and it is available through both the Natural Resources Department's website as well as your tribal education page. They, like I mentioned, it's been digitized, so anywhere that you see possibly that it says DVD, we used to have DVDs that we would share with schools, and now it is all online. So let's take a look at this. A new share, here we go. And so the opening page, you can see the CSKT Division of Fish, Wildlife, Recreation, and Conservation. I think I've been saying natural resources, so pardon me for but hopefully you just get the gist. So not only is there background information, but there is all kinds of resources that are within this whole curriculum. Coyote story, of course, we don't share the coyote story until there's snow on the ground, but this is absolutely one of my very favorite books. If you are new to the reservation or new to the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribal practices, there is a beautiful statement at the beginning of Beaver Steele's Fire from the Culture Committee giving guidance on when the story should be told. There are interviews and videos, beautiful pictures that can be used for visual thinking skills, fire ecology, history. And then there is also, once you get into the fire ecology, and this really gets into that energy exchange. The fire comes, it takes away the green nutrients, but it adds carbon, and of course carbon is the building block of life. So there's all kinds of information in here on that. So once again, let's check in. 4 R's. Relationships, check. Relevant and respectful, check. Reciprocal, check. Responsible. And moving on to high school. So here is another standard that does include American Indian specifically. Another life science standard: design, evaluate, and refine a solution for reducing the direct and indirect impacts of human activities on the environment and biodiversity, and analyze scientific concepts used by American Indians to maintain healthy relationships with environmental resources. So here we have a wonderful offering. I've been talking about the People's Way wildlife crossings, and I talked about the climate change, the elder climate change videos. That's all in this curriculum for 912. This was developed by Montana's 2022 Teacher of the Year from Arlee High School, Bill Stockton. He has a wonderful website. Do a reshare here. He has a wonderful website here, and he has examples of integrated lessons. If you go to this page and you scroll down, here's the CSKT Climate Change Lesson Plan. There are all of the documents for you to download, and then there's the Wildlife Crossings, the People's Way lesson plans. This is a phenomenal unit. We've got to test it out with teachers and in a whole room full of teachers at a conference. And I was so impressed by the work that Bill did with this to present the tribal narrative and individual tribal scientist narrative, all kinds of stakeholders that were involved with the Wildlife Crossings. Their perspectives are represented in this amazing curriculum. Let's see, okay, I'm gonna go to new share and we're gonna go back to our PowerPoint here. So, oops, sorry about that. So our 4 R's checklist, again, relationships, check, relevant and respectful, check, reciprocal, check, responsible, check. So hopefully you can see how all of this can work together and isn't really asking anything extra, but except for taking a step back and not teaching the subject and not teaching the context, but teaching about how to approach information from the 4R and from the values that are often, tribal values and indigenous values, to make sure that those relationships are intact, to make sure that the information shared is relevant and respectful, to make sure that if you're asking for any information or wisdom or time, that's reciprocated. And of course, teaching these students who are living in the most beautiful place on the planet, in my personal opinion, where you live is spectacular. Let's help the students want to be stewards of this and protect this beautiful environment so that generations on down the line can also experience the beauty of the Flathead Valley. So how do we get there? Well, when you start thinking about changing your perspective in how you teach science and even indigenizing your curriculum and coming from a value standpoint, I will never forget when Tim Ryan was teaching about rocks one time, and a little while after that, he and I were walking along the Flathead River. And he picked up a rock and he's like, this is alive. And I'm like, my friend, I'm really struggling with that. As a scientist, rocks are. And the way Tim Ryan explained it to me that day absolutely shifted my paradigm about what it means to be alive. And right then and there is how I started sharing about science integration with Indian Ed for All changed. That was just a spectacular moment of really stepping outside of my comfort zone, stepping outside of my biases, and embracing a new way of looking at it. And for me, it was a way of embracing it that I wanted to take ownership of and that I wanted to integrate into who I was. I like it better that rocks are my relatives. If you look at almost everywhere you look in my home, there's some sort of rock. And of course, this is a fossil of a nautilus that I've had for many, many years. It used to be in my classroom. And I just love feeling connected that way. So be sure to be open to other perspectives and ways to make sense of the world. And I really invite you to bring that into your pedagogy. Bring the pedagogy of other perspectives. Bring the pedagogy of, there's many ways to see the world. And sometimes when you shift your perspective, it's one of the most exciting things that you can ever do. Land-based, look at where you live, location, location, location. You sort of have some of the best real estate in all of Montana, but, making it relevant, having that relationship. Where are you from? Where am I from? Even if you are not from there, you have a relationship to place, as I began with, at the very beginning. And so even knowing that, and even knowing some questions about where you come from, can help you have questions about where you are. If you're not sure about the land that you're on, develop a relationship. Develop a relationship with the people of the land. You've got incredible resources right there. Don't be shy. be relevant. Let them know how much it matters to have students have this this primary perspective of, you know, someone who lives on the land and is indigenous to that place. Be responsible and respectful, and show reciprocity and gratitude. And finally, relevance. If it matters to you and you believe in the connections, it will make it more relevant to your students. I encourage you, I invite you to cultivate relationships, cultivate curiosity for the land you are on, cultivate a wondering to see all the ways the various people and parts of the world are connected for your students. So in summary, we're all starving for relationships. Maybe it's the pandemic, maybe it's just the way of the digital world, but I think so many of us are seeking a sense of connection. And let's do this through science. Relationships are key. Respectful relationships are essential. Relevance leads to respect and deeper relationships. Reciprocity brings relevance to a relationship. Responsibility is the result of a respectful relationship. I am so glad to be in relationship with you today, despite this digital, weird Ethernet world we now live in. Thank you so much for your time listening to this. If you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me through email. Here is also our website. If you haven't checked out the OPI Indian Education for All website, I certainly invite you to do so. Lemlench, thank you so much.